going on, guys? Welcome back to the Daily Dish Tournament Edition. Going to be recapping Iowa State's loss in the finals of the Big 12 tournament. Obviously, a tough test against Texas. Ooh, kind of a lot of T's there. But yeah, to me, it just kind of seemed like Texas was the better team that day. And, I mean, the number 2 seed kind of makes you think that, oh, they beat the number 1, maybe they can beat the number 2. But, you know, Texas coming in as like a top 5 team in the nation. I mean, they didn't do as well as Oklahoma in conference play, which is why they fell a little bit, but they were still one of the best teams in the Big 12, and that was very evident.
Yeah, we knew it was going to be tough coming in because Texas did hand Iowa State its biggest loss in the conference season, 81-60 in Austin. So it was a revenge game this time, a rematch of last year's championship game. So you thought, all right, they beat them last year. Maybe they can do the same thing. But yeah, Texas was just everywhere they needed to be, offensively, defensively. They just dominated, and it started right away.
Yeah, especially defensively. They shut down Audie really quick. I mean, she was held to 6 points in the first half. Her moves just weren't really working. They were double-teaming her, and really she had some unlucky shots inside as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it really seemed like a repeat of the first game between the two, where if you really count the second half, Iowa State's in that game. It was just that second quarter that they kind of took their foot off the gas. They weren't hitting shots. Was it the first 5 minutes of that quarter, no points at all were scored. And then Texas was just able to build such a big lead that, you know, Iowa State not being able to get on as many runs as Texas or as big of runs, they just couldn't cut into that lead.
And that kind of starts off with Texas started pressing on probably Iowa State's second or third offensive possession. And that really was something that Iowa State struggled with all game. They had big problems breaking the press, and we saw that in the Baylor game too. And Texas and Baylor are fairly similar teams, I'd say, in terms of physicality, athleticness, and Iowa State just, they struggled with that. And also that run that you're talking about in that second quarter that Texas went on, it started in the first quarter. Iowa State went the final 3 minutes of the first quarter scoreless as well. So there's 8 minutes right there, 20% of the game where Iowa State can't generate any offense.
Yeah, no, really, you talk about the press leading into just no offense. It really comes down to like turnovers. I mean, Iowa State just, they weren't able to break that press, and then on the offensive end, they were just making sloppy plays inside, or Texas's defense was just faster than them. So there was just turnover after turnover, and I mean, that's been just the case all season, but it really came into full force against Texas.
You kind of knew that was going to work because of the size that Texas has. I mean, they have an advantage in nearly every position, so you thought that, you know, if Iowa State can't find a way around this, then, you know, it's going to be basically over offensive for them. And you said that, you know, they kind of got things going in that second half, which they did, but another factor that they couldn't overcome was giving up big shots from Texas behind the arc.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, I mean, Shea Hawley has been just really good the whole tournament. They were leaving her open at times, and I mean, if you leave her open, she's going to hit. I mean, Madison Booker is just incredible from wherever she's at. You know, she is probably the most pure mid-range shooter I've seen, at least in the Big 12. I mean, she deserved every bit of that co-player of the year. And, I mean, she lit up Iowa State. I mean, it was just as simple as that. As, you know, they were faster. Their ball movement was really good, so they were able to get people open, get shots created, and then people were hitting from beyond the arc. I mean, they were shooting pretty much near 80% throughout most of the game until probably the final quarter there. I mean, it really did seem like they were just making shots fall better.
Emily Ryan said it after the game that Madison Booker deserved every award that she's gotten this year. She is such a fantastic player, and every time that Iowa State started to generate some offense in the second half, Texas always had an answer. And the biggest one that I saw was Ariana Jackson's 3 that she hit with a minute to go in the third quarter. Huge shot, got the crowd back into it. Texas goes back on the other end. Madison Booker hits a mid-range jumper right at the buzzer.
Yeah,
Huge momentum killer right there. And at that point, I was like, all right, Texas has this in hand. This thing's over.
Yeah, and then Iowa State's just battling back in that last quarter. And, I mean, they keep cutting the lead back down to 15 and then giving up another shot and then cutting it back down and giving up another shot. Like, they just weren't able to make enough headway, and time was just running out so fast that I mean, if they had maybe 2 more quarters, maybe you could see them come back. But it really just seemed like they just didn't have enough steam to deal with Texas, because Texas is just that much faster, that much more dynamic on offense and especially on defense.
And something that we kind of talked about was that, this is kind of the reverse of the Oklahoma game where Iowa State, caught Texas on a really hot shooting night, and it was the reverse from Oklahoma's standpoint for Iowa State, where they just couldn't, find their shots early on. And you kind of said that you think if this was a 3-game series that, maybe Iowa State wins, but I don't know. I just think Texas was by far the better team in this matchup, especially offensively. And we kind of predicted that going in, that Texas was gonna kind of beat up on them, but maybe they had a chance. But that first quarter and really that second quarter as well just really set the tone for a rough night for Iowa State.
Yeah, I was joking about the 3-game series, but I mean, if Texas had played Iowa State when Iowa State was playing as well as they did against Oklahoma, maybe we'd be talking about a different story there. But I mean, Iowa State was still kind of hitting. I mean, if you look at the game overall, they were still hitting at a high rate. I mean, you look at Audie Crooks kind of being scoreless for a while, her low shooting numbers early on. She still ended with 25 points, shooting over 50% from the field. So it's like, Iowa State was cold at the time and Texas was hot, but, they still lost by more than what would have been made up if those roles had been switched.
And it wasn't a bad shooting night at all for Iowa State. The Cyclones shot 47% from the field. Texas actually shot 46%. The biggest thing was that 3-point differential. Iowa State did shoot 50%, but Texas had 64%. So that was kind of a big thing that you were talking about yesterday, of Texas was hitting from threes very early. They just couldn't seem to miss from that range, and that was kind of a big piece of it. And those turnovers, too. Iowa State turns it over 20 times to Texas's 7. That's a ton of missed opportunities and just points off the board for Iowa State.
Not to kind of blame, the refs at all or use it kind of as a reason that Iowa State lost, but there was a little bit of inconsistent calls on both ends, really, because Texas was playing like the same type of defense, back to or arm to the back, and that was getting called more on Iowa State. And I believe Texas shot a good amount of free throws, way more than Iowa State did, and it was kind of frustrating. Us as Christian and I, we sat in the stands and we're kind of realizing the crowd was getting into it with that standpoint. But overall, I mean, Iowa State offensively couldn't come back in this game, and not that more free throws would have helped, but it was just a little inconsistent calls on both ends.
Yeah, I think they started making up the calls later on. I mean, I think that last quarter at least, they were starting to finally call stuff inside, which kind of evened it out. But I mean, you go back to the 3-point differential, that really did seem like just the dagger early on. I mean, on that point, you kind of want to see Hannah Bellinger get more shots, because I mean, she was hitting at a high rate, and yet she only made like 3-pointers.
Yeah, she went 3 for 4 from 3 in this game. So definitely better than the other 2 games she was starting to hit. But I think it comes down to Texas's defense was just closing out super fast every single time Iowa State had the ball. And there were a couple times that Hannah was open, but it was just kind of a bad pass, or, Texas gets there a little early and they kind of have to reset and everything. And that kind of leads to Hannah not having those opportunities as much. But yeah, I think that she was the hot hand in this one. If they did get her the ball a couple more times in the first half, especially that second quarter, maybe things start to go a different way, but I think the deficit was probably too much in the end.
Yeah, and I think they were trying to look for opportunities on the outside. They were trying to feed Audie, but again, it comes down to the turnovers. I mean, Emily Ryan, although she had another great game assist-wise, she also turned the ball over 9 times trying to feed the ball to people. It's just Texas's defense is just that airtight, and they leave like no room to breathe, no room for errors. So you pair that with the fact that Iowa State's trying so hard to get back into the game. They're trying to like claw back in, and they just really couldn't get anything going, because it seemed like every shot they took almost seemed forced, because they weren't seeing as many shots, or I guess ideal shots.
In the presser, we could kind of hear Bill talking about how, despite the outcome, this team has gotten a lot farther than anyone would have predicted them to be, especially with, all these young stars that they have that are looking really good. I mean, I'm sitting in the stands looking at some of the freshmen, Addie Brown, Ariana Jackson, Audie Crooks. I mean, they're not looking like freshmen. They look like they've been here multiple times in a Big 12 championship game, and they're not going to have to face Texas ever again. So, Iowa State is definitely setting themselves up to be one of the better teams in the Big 12 for the next, 3-4 years, whatever the case may be.
And I think it comes down also not just their performance on the court. They present themselves so well off the court too. They're just fantastic people. I think that their personalities are a big part of maybe how they play as well, just how they're willing to accept things and learn from it and grow from it. And when you add the Emily Ryans coming back again next year, I don't think it's out of question that we have a very solid chance of seeing Iowa State back in the championship game again next season.
Yeah, and I think that whole group just is so connected, and I think it's just because they are all coming in as freshmen. There's so many freshmen coming in, and there's not a lot of returners. So really, they have one or two cyclones from the past to look up to, but really it's just them. And I mean, they're all learning the same way. They're all going to classes. You said they go to classes together. They're all entering college at the same time. So it really just helps them bond better than if they're staggered and you're trying to somebody might be up here and another person's down here, and they all came in at the same level. So it really just shows just how connected they are.
And they've gotten so much better throughout the season too. We've seen them just progress and blossom throughout the season, and I think that the biggest piece that may hurt Iowa State next year is the loss of Hannah Bellinger, because we know that she took her COVID year this year, so she's not going to be there. Someone's going to need to step up as the top 3-point shooter next season for Iowa State.
And that'll come with also looking through the portal as well, finding someone. I mean, they found Hannah Bellinger through the portal, so they're definitely capable of doing that. I mean, they're going to I think that they'll probably be preseason top 25 going into next year with how talented they're going to be, but I mean, the future is definitely bright for them.
Yeah, and you talk about making up 3-pointers. I feel like there are some proven 3-point shooters in that group of freshmen too. I mean, Kelsey Jones, I think, obviously she didn't have as good of a freshman season as we kind of hoped from her, but she still proved that she can score from pretty much anywhere. And I mean, you look at Ariana Jackson, able to hit down crucial 3-pointers at times, Jalen Bristow. I mean, there's so many people that can knock those 3-pointers down that I think they should be able to make up for Hannah Bellinger, especially if they have that off season. And I mean, depending on where they go in the NCAA tournament.
Just kind of add on that too. All 5 freshmen did hit a 3 against Oklahoma. So that was pretty big too. And yeah, I think that Kelsey Jones kind of turned it on in this tournament. She had a really good game against Oklahoma. She had solid minutes against Texas. I think that if she can continue that, into the NCAA tournament, I think it can carry forward next year, and Kelsey Jones can definitely progress into a top player for Iowa State.
Yeah, and I assume seeding and bracketology better than we do on the women's side. So do we have, and I know there's, it's still games playing out, but is there kind of an idea of where Iowa State falls in the bracket?
Yeah, so looking at ESPN's bracketology that came out today being Wednesday, March 13th, Iowa State's currently listed as an 8 seed, playing out in Los Angeles. 1 seed would be USC out there. Likely going to be in California. It's looking like it'll be either USC or Stanford. That will be the host team for Iowa State. But there is that slight possibility that they could go to Iowa City, because Iowa's in there as a 1 seed right now. Iowa State probably going to end up as an 8 or a 9 seed. It probably won't happen, but that would be crazy if it does. Iowa State fans will definitely travel 100 million% if it goes to Iowa City.
Yeah, second Cyhawk game in the tournament would just be insane. And I mean, you talk about all 3 of those teams, USC, Stanford, Iowa. I mean, those are 3 really, really good teams. And I mean, USC will just be such a tough task. I mean, if that's the one that they get. I mean, they did pull out miracles last year, winning the Big 12 titles. So, and they did beat Oklahoma this year in the Big 12 tournament. So they have proven that they can take down good teams, but not being able to hang with Texas kind of is a little scary for where they fall once they get to those really dominant teams in the nation.
Yeah, it's going to be a scary them as an 8-9 seed kind of sets the expectations low, just kind of how they've been all season. So, they could make a dark horse run, I think, but it just, like you said, any team that they get matched up with, that's going to be the 1 seed. It's going to be hard. So, I mean, we'll just have to see what happens. But overall, they got to go into this knowing that, they could win 1 game and, just see where it goes from there.
Yeah, and then on the men's side, they start their tournament tomorrow as we're filming this, and they could play either Texas or Kansas State. So, I mean, 2 teams, honestly, what I was saying is these are the 2 scariest teams to go up against in the first round.
Yeah, especially teams that, are going to have an extra game going into the matchup with Iowa State. Personally, if you're Iowa State, it's bad on both ends. Kansas State, you just lost to them in Manhattan. And in Texas, they're looking really solid down the stretch. Tyrese Hunter just had a 30-point game last week or a week and a half ago. So their offense in general is just coming on really solid. But, maybe, they have that extra motivation to get the upset, or not the upset, but the revenge game against Kansas State. But these are 2 tough teams that you're going to have to face. I mean, I'm sure if you're Iowa State, you'd rather be facing whatever the other second-round team games are, Kansas or Cincinnati. I mean, but, you're going to have to go up against either Texas or Kansas State, 2 teams that are looking really good at this time of the year.
Yeah, and I think it might come down to atmosphere as well because, I said before the game against Texas and Kansas State that this might come down to how fans travel because Texas winning the women's tournament means that, especially with how late the game was, means that all those Texas fans are still going to be here. They could just stay an extra night and actually pack the stadium. I mean, it was a decent turnout for what I expected in the Big 12 in the women's side championship game. I mean, they were really vocal at times, so you could really tell that there was some atmosphere there. But also Kansas State showed out when they played Texas the day before. So, I mean, it really depends. I mean, we should be able to see during this Kansas State-Texas game which fan base kind of travels better. Kansas State going home a day earlier than, you would have expected, then maybe they don't want to make the trip back up. But, again, it's a short trip. Iowa State fans travel well. Kansas State fans also travel well. So, I mean, really 2 fan bases that could really rally around their teams, kind of makes it a little bit scarier.
Yeah, and you look at those 3 teams with their the show out of fans in the women's tournament. Iowa State, I would say by far none had the most fans. Kansas State probably was second, but I think it was Texas in Iowa State's 3 games that had the most fans as an opposing team to the Cyclones. So I think that regardless of who wins between Kansas State or Texas, there's going to be a good number of that team's fans as compared to Iowa State fans. That game likely will have the most fans in attendance of any game throughout the 2 weeks of these tournaments.
Yeah, especially with, Texas win the women's championship and, football earlier, a couple months ago. Texas fans are looking to kind of get that final sweep going into the SEC, so they're definitely going to stick around. But, I mean, they got to win that game first against Kansas State. I think they will. I think they're just looking a lot better at this time of the year, offensively especially. But, I could see Kansas coming out. They, forced a lot of turnovers from Iowa State on Saturday, so they can do so again on Texas. I know that was a problem when Iowa State played Texas, is that Texas kind of couldn't really get the ball moving. But, I mean, I'm excited for this game and then, tomorrow's game as well for Iowa State, whoever they end up playing, but it's going to be tough no matter what.
Yeah, and I think, you talk about the 2 teams, Texas obviously being a lot better offensively. I mean, they can really match up with Iowa State well, which is what's scary is because Iowa State's offense is kind of lacking, kind of dipping at this point of the year. But Kansas State on the defensive end looked really good in Manhattan. And, I mean, you talk about fans traveling. It could be like a true neutral site game. It's not going to be like Hilton South. Could be wherever Manhattan is. But Manhattan, Northeast, Southwest, wherever it goes.
I think it's west somewhere.
Manhattan West. That's what we'll say. But, I mean, you talk about that being a factor. I mean, Iowa State, with their offense struggling the way it is, has been relying on its defense. Texas could be looking to just, blow over Iowa State's defense. Kansas State could be looking to mirror Iowa State's defense. I mean, these are just two teams that are really hungry right now, hitting a good stride when it matters. And, I mean, Iowa State taking a rest, we'll see if that helps them or hurts them.
Right. And we keep talking about their offense. Texas has scored, I believe, 80 points in 3 of their last 4 games. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do the same against Kansas State today. And then moving on to Iowa State, I mean, they're looking at them. They know that Iowa State's struggling. And I think personally this is probably the worst stretch that Iowa State can go on to go into this game. While they were winning games outside of that Kansas State matchup on Saturday, they're just not looking good offensively. And it kind of just feels like not only are they looking towards, just the conference tournament, but they're looking at the NCAA tournament. And I know, winning this conference championship wouldn't really do much for you. Yes, you would probably get a win against Houston in the championship game. Maybe that moves you up to a 2 seed. Definitely not a 1 seed wherever they're at right now. I think they're at a 3. But, Iowa State doesn't have much to gain from this, but they still have to come out and show that they can look the way that they did before this last 5-game stretch to end the season.
Yeah, you really can't just go out on a first round exit if you're trying to prove that you're a top 3 seed going into the big tournament. So, I mean, really, we're just going to have to wait to see what goes on between Kansas State and Texas, and then we'll kind of know a better idea of how that team is playing and trending to when they get to Iowa State. So,
yeah, I think you guys also got to kind of look at it as Iowa State. It probably won't matter if they lose their first round matchup, but the fact that they could be going into the NCAA tournament cold on a 2-game losing streak is probably a bad thing. I think that they'd want to win at least 1 game to kind of start to say, all right, we can win games in the postseason. We can win in March. Maybe we can have a chance to try and make a run in the postseason, in not only the Big 12 tournament, but in the NCAA tournament as well.
Yeah, momentum plays a huge factor in these games. So we will be back with more coverage, more recapping of the games as they unfold. Right now all we can do is just wait for the Texas-Kansas State game to be over so that we know more about what we're in for. So thank you guys for watching another episode of The Daily Dish, and we will be back later this week with more.